you all for sticking around. I know it's a beautiful day out there, and I'm sure it's quite a challenge to sit through this for a third panel, but I can guarantee you'll find it educational. Um, so today on this panel, we're going to talk about the financial challenges facing seniors. Those of you that may have aging parents or relatives, I guarantee you these topics will resonate with you. And I think this will provide a nice bookend to the first panel today, where we talked about the financial welfare of a younger audience. Um, so we are very privileged today to be joined by three experts that research the senior part of the population. Today we have Angie Chen from the Boston Center of Retirement Research. We have Dr. Chris Heye, who's the founder of Whealthcare Planning. And finally, we have Rob Mascio from FINRA. And then myself, my name's Eric Wimer. I'm retired now. I was in the asset management industry for over 30 years. And as part of that, I was been a member of the Boston Society, CFA Society. And as being a member, you'd occasionally get those emails saying, "Hey, do you want to join this volunteer group, financial literacy?" And several years ago, I decided to do that and met Alice and met Mike, and we used to have something called during COVID financial Finlit Fridays, where we would have Zoom calls, and Mike would start us off with a great tune. He'd make a great DJ. He'd probably hire him out for parties. You hear Mike? Yeah, yeah. There you go. All right. So that's my story, but more importantly, I'd like the three experts here to introduce themselves. Angie, could you start us off?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. I'm Angie Chen, and I lead household finance and savings research at the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. And so we are a research group, and we look at all things that impact financial and retirement security for households. Most of my work focuses on households' decisions, both throughout their life and how and in retirement. And so a lot of our research work to tie into some of the earlier panels about younger folks. We look at, how they save their student loan decisions, whether first gen students have the same resources as second gen college students or continuing gen college students. And then, transfers, right? Not just parent to child transfers, which are really common, but child to parent transfers, which are also common among certain populations. But on this panel, we also do a lot of work on obviously the retired population, how they manage their income and their risks. And long-term care risk obviously is a big risk in retirement.
So my name's Chris Heye. I'm the CEO and founder of Whealthcare Planning and Whealthcare Solutions. I'm also a research fellow at LIMRA, formerly of the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I do research and writing and develop software tools that sit at the intersection of sort of health and wealth and longevity. And what I'm primarily trying to do is help older adults and their families more effectively prepare for these health and longevity related risks. And I have a lot of sort of mostly unfortunate, but some fortunate experience with dementia. So I've been focusing a little bit more on thinking about cognitive decline and trying to help families more effectively protect themselves from a lot of the behavioral and cognitive changes that can happen to older adults. So I do have some tools and educational materials out there. If you're interested, come talk to me afterwards. But that's been my focus now for several years.
Right. And I'm Rob Mascio. As mentioned, I'm with FINRA. And so some of you might know FINRA, the regulator. Other ones, I know we've had a lot of talk about the FINRA Foundation research that we do. Two kind of separate organizations that have the same tie, right? And I actually work for both organizations. FINRA is the regulator, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. We regulate brokerage firms and their employees, so a small section of the securities market. Not a government agency, we're a self-regulatory organization. Then the foundation is a subsidiary of FINRA, and through the foundation is where we do our programmatic efforts. So within the foundation, we focus on building wealth and protecting wealth. So on the building wealth side, we do a lot of work to help improve the financial literacy of individuals and to work with partners to have individuals have a healthier and better relationship with money. And then on the other side, we have the protecting wealth side, which is where I actually spend the majority of my time, which is on all things financial fraud related. So we do conduct research on both sides, and I really appreciated the call out to some of the research that we did. I just wanted to plug in that our investor study has just come out based off of the NFCS data, and it kind of focuses more on that investor component. One of the interesting pieces I just wanted to point out was 79% of young individuals use social media for investment advice. Right. So that's a staggering number. I know we're talking about seniors, but I wanted to throw it out there. It recently came out, I think about maybe 3 weeks ago to a month ago. So our investor study, it does analyze some of the data from the 2024 NFCS data. I'm going to stop there. I just had to plug it in.
Frightening.
It is frightening. It is frightening.
That
And
is frightening.
as most of you know, it does not take much to be a finfluencer or somebody who is in the influencer space trying to give financial advice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Rob. So we're going to start off with Angie. Angie today is going to share some great research BCRR has done on the financial challenges of long-term health care to both seniors and their caretakers. So Angie, start off with a pretty broad question. How would you define long-term care?
Yeah. So long-term care is, I don't think there's necessarily a standard definition of it. Like you see different people defining it differently. But I mean, the way we look at it is when older people, if they need help with any aspect of just like living independently, that can be considered for extended periods of time, that can be considered long-term care. That ranges widely, but I think what people are mostly scared of is the dementia cases, right? Like many, many years of needing around the clock care. And that's about, 20% of the population. Not small, not tiny, but not sort of like everyone's going to have it. But most people will need some help to manage their lives as they get older. So 80% of people will need some help. That can range from just needing help managing finances, groceries, help around the house, someone to check in on you every once in a while, to the extreme case that I talked about. So 80% of older adults will need some sort of help and support as they get older. 20% will need the scary kind, as I think I like to call it. And then there's a large group of people who fall somewhere in the middle.
Could you help us scope out the required length and intensity of care that the senior population would require?
Yeah, so that we look at it across 2 dimensions. So like you said, length and intensity. And so the very mild cases are, someone needs help with making sure that the auto pay is set up for their bills, that they're not lapsing on any of their financial accounts, that they need help, getting groceries every once in a while. And then those cases usually last pretty long, but they're not as intensive on caregivers. And that is usually the care support is usually provided by family. And then as you get to the more intense, sort of 3+ years of dementia-like care. And so when we call high intensity care, it's if you need help with 2 or more activities of daily living. And so those are very basic things like getting out of bed, getting dressed, eating, going to the bathroom, showering, things like that. If you need help with 2 or more of those, then that's called high intensity care. And then so high intensity plus 3+ years, which is what I call the scary kind of long-term care. That's about 20% of the population will end up with that level of care
Okay.
needs.
So earlier this year, AARP came out with a report stating that the costs associated with home health care and assisted living care increased by as much as 50% between 2019 and 2024. 50%. So how are families, how are seniors dealing with, this astronomical cost? Or are they not dealing with it?
So they're dealing with it by relying on family, and long-term care has always heavily relied on family members, and particularly women, right? And so daughters and spouses have provided a lot of the care needs of older adults. And, at sort of the lower intensity care needs, they provide pretty much all of it. And even at the high intensity. So what I described that, someone needs help eating or bathing or getting dressed, family members provide half of all care hours. And I think part of that is really because it is so expensive to hire home care or to go go into an assisted living or nursing home. But we did do a survey a couple of years ago about family caregivers and how to best support them. There is a lot of just desire to help their family members, oftentimes parents and spouses. And so we hear caregivers say like, no one else can do it as well as I can, or my parents wouldn't trust anyone else to help them with these needs, which makes sense. But it does put a lot of the burden on caregivers. And a lot of times caregivers have to sacrifice financially, either like actually paying for things out of pocket, or they have to take a step back from their career to provide this care. And so it kind of snowballs to other family members.
Right. So, that sort of leads to the question, how prepared are seniors and their families to provide this long-term care, right? You suggested that some family members may have to reduce their work or change their work and things like that. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, I mean it's really hard to uh prepare for, especially the catastrophic types of care, right? Like
Yeah.
if you need 3, 5, 10 years of intensive around the clock care, it's really hard to expect families to have, and nursing homes or assisted living costs 100,000 plus a year. It's really hard to expect most families to have that kind of money set aside. I mean, we do a lot of work on retirement preparedness, and half of families don't have enough saved up just for like basic retirement spending needs. And so to say like, oh, you also need to be prepared for these like really devastating events that may or may not happen is really hard for families to prepare. But we also, I think the first step is, from this theme of this conference is literacy, right? Understanding the risks. So we did a lot of work on perception. So like there's a lot of layers of lack of understanding and misperception in the long-term care risks. So one is just the basic, like do households understand the risks of needing long-term care as they go older? Because there's no way to plan for it if you don't understand the risks, right? And then the next layer is, if they understand the risks, do they understand what their risks might be? So we have average risks, which was what I had talked about, but do they understand that, for example, women have a higher risk of getting dementia because they live longer. And dementia is very much an older age disease. Do people from do Black and brown households understand that they also have a higher risk of needing long-term care? If someone is worked in certain industries, so they understand that they are probably at higher risk of needing care as they get older. So that's part of, so like average risks, their own personal risks that may occur, and then the costs, right? And so the risks are one side, what are the costs are on the other side? And then do they have plans in place that works for their finances? I think it's probably unrealistic for us as a society to say everyone should take on the burden of providing for and planning for the extreme cases of long-term care needs. And so, but like a lot of families find workarounds, including relying on family care. And then there's a lot of policy discussions that try and support families out there as well. So that's the first step, like really understanding the whole picture of the risks, the costs, and what your family is willing and able to do if that situation arises. So I think that's a big, big thing.
Yeah, one part in your research that I found interesting was it showed how financial advisors seem to have a much more realistic understanding of the costs associated with long-term care than, seniors and their families themselves. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So we did a series of studies in partnership with Jackson Life Insurance Company. They were looking at just broader risks in retirement, and we surveyed investors. So these are even the subset of households who had assets. So they had at least $200,000 or more of investable assets, which, just to put things into context, that puts you in the top like 40% of households in the US. So like the top 40% of households, how are they thinking about these things? About 2/3 of these households had or do work with an advisor. We surveyed the households. They had no idea about the risks, how much it costs. Like almost no one got the risks or the costs correct. They also had really a huge misperceptions about what was available for the if they needed the care. So a lot of them thought that Medicare could step in and provide long-term care, which it doesn't. A lot of them thought that they could eventually rely on Medicaid if they needed to, but most of these households, because of the subset that we were looking at, would have to completely impoverish themselves, and a lot of them had their pension and social security benefits would just automatically disqualify them from Medicaid anyway. A lot of them thought that they would never touch their house. In most households, if they do end up in this situation, they would have to tap home equity. And then the one thing that I found that was a little sort of interesting was that a lot of households said I would never move in with my kids, and about a quarter of older adults do end up relying on their kids for help, and so there's that. So they had very little idea of the risks, the costs, and what they might have to do if they needed care. Advisors had a really, really good sense. Most of them got the answers correct. So a really interesting question for us is like, and 2/3 of these people had advisors. So like, why isn't that information getting from the advisors to their clients? Like, why is there an information barrier? We didn't dig too deeply into this, but a lot of the advisors said that a lot of families, if they do try, and a lot of them don't bring it up. If they do try and bring it up, the families just don't want to talk about it. And so if there is like a denial, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to deal with this, then it's really hard to plan or prepare.
Right. So, last question for you, and you touched upon this, the children providing care. Is there a larger role now for quote unquote informal caregivers because of the costs associated with more formal methods?
I don't know about larger role, but so this informal care has always been it provided the vast majority of care hours
Yeah.
for older adults. And so it may become even more salient in the future. But we're kind of also pushing up against demographic changes. Like in prior generations, people had 3, 4 kids, right? Where there's more resources, there's maybe a shared burden among children to help parents. But we are facing demographic changes, so people don't have large families anymore, and so that will place even larger burdens on children if their parents do face care needs.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. So on to you, Chris. So Chris has been doing some fascinating research concerning cognitive decline and how that can potentially hamper individuals making financial decisions. So first question for you, Chris. Talk about decision risk.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, one thing we don't talk about enough, we've talked to financial professionals, and historically they've talked a lot about what I would call market risk. So the market's going to go down, interest rates are going to go up, inflation's going to go up. And they've really focused, and most advisors do a really great job of being able to identify and mitigate and manage those risks. But the world is changing in some really important ways. I mean, one thing it's kind of obvious, but people are living longer. So I mean, my dad died when he was 70. My grandfather, I never met my grandfather. He died. I think he maybe made it to 60. I mean, even when my dad died at 70, that seemed kind of young, but people are living 10, 20, 30 years past the traditional age of retirement. So up until a generation or two ago, we didn't have to worry too much about sort of retirement risk or cognitive decline even, because most of us, by the time we reached 65, we were dead. Or, there was a very much smaller proportion of the population that made it that far. So now that, of course, is changing. So people are living longer. And so what I think that does is it introduces some new risks. And so in addition to these market risks, we have long-term care and healthcare risks, right? And more advisors are talking about that. So that's another risk that, again, we didn't have to worry about that much because most of us, didn't live that long. And also there's been tremendous inflation in healthcare, as we all know. So that was a risk, but much less than it is now. And then finally, so I think, and then yet another risk now that many of us are dealing with, and our parents or us at some point, is what I call decision risk. So again, 30, 50 years ago, retirement planning, yeah, you got to replan for retirement, but again, you probably, you make a bad decision here, that may not matter because again, you have a heart attack when you're 64 and that's it. So now we really need to think about planning, right? Planning's a real thing. All of you, I'm not saying anything you don't know, obviously. So, but planning entails making a lot of decisions. And unfortunately, in my life, I've seen, my mother had dementia, her sister had dementia, my grandmother, her mother had dementia, my ex-mother-in-law had dementia. Unfortunately, in my mother's case, we did okay. And I can talk a little more how we did that. To your point, I have 3 other siblings, so there were 4 of us taking care of mom. Well, my brother didn't do much, but he never does anything. So, but part of the reason why and that's part of the reason how I got to where I am now, but I also saw, I had 2 friends whose parents it was some combination of being scammed and bad decision-making, millions of dollars. We're not talking thousands of dollars, not talking tens. One of my friends, in one case, father was in his 70s, very successful entrepreneur, got divorced, was dating younger women, and she said $300,000 was leaving his account every month, and she wasn't sure why. And it took her, a long time to figure it out in legal battles. So do the math. If it takes 1 year, you're talking $3 million. Another friend's father went in for routine surgery, heart surgery. Something bad happened. They weren't sure. 6 months later, $2 million was gone. Turns out he had mini strokes. And in both cases, the children, one was a Princeton graduate, one was a doctor, one was, these are really, really smart people. And that still happened to that family. So I think now we're kind of in this new era where we have this thing that I call decision risk, and it's becoming, to me, I think, as or more significant as these market risks. There was also a really interesting study that came out recently. It was just published in the NBR, National Bureau of Economic Research, and it showed it was tracking these families over about 10 years. It was tracking their net worth, and they had this method that seems pretty good about figuring out like which one of those families was led by someone with dementia. I can let you know that if you're interested. It's fascinating and really depressing at the same time. And you might have seen this. But basically, the bottom line was after about this was like 6 years before diagnosis. The other thing that this happens really early, right? So financial decision making is one of the first skills to decline. So, and we could talk about the reasons behind that. But basically, they tracked the cohort of sort of normal, cognitively normal people versus people with cognitive decline. And after about 4 or 6 years, the cognitive decline group was down about 25%. 25%.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about, oh, the market's down 10%, everybody's freaking out. But the other thing too is the markets usually come back, right? Inflation goes down, it comes back. Markets go down, it comes up. Guess what usually doesn't come back? Cognitive capacity. Usually there's some evidence you could bring it back up a little bit. But basically my point is that, this is 25% of someone's net worth.
Yeah.
That's not nothing. And that's because they made bad decisions, full stop. This is controlling for the market, controlling for income, controlling for race, everything.
Yeah.
So 25%. And I think and again, I've seen worse. I think that's a risk that more and more people need to talk about. And to your point, I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about these discussions between the advisors and their clients. And I'm always fascinated with these discussions and hearing about this. And my favorite surveys are ones that say, they ask the advisor what services you are providing, and they ask their clients what services they're getting. And they're frequently, you kind of wonder. So I think, to your point, I think there's a stigma on behalf of the families that talk about this, but I think there's arguably even a bigger stigma on the advisor side. And one thing, and I'll finish. One thing, an advisor once said to me, I thought it really stuck with me. He said, if you're a fiduciary, your duty is to protect your clients from all financial risks. And the point being not just the stock market going down, not just, interest rates going up, but these other health-related, longevity-related risks. So, and I've spoken about this at, other places. So when I've talked to a lot of financial professionals and they're always say, well, how do I start this conversation? And a couple of things I say, but one thing I say is, look, just tell your client, it's your fiduciary duty. It's my fiduciary duty to talk to you about these issues. And then I have other suggestions about how you initiate that conversation. But I think it's important to keep in mind that it can be difficult to have these conversations, especially when you're talking about cognitive decline. But other thing I'd like to say, it's the only thing harder than having these conversations is not having them, because the consequences can be really severe. And that's another way to broach the subject, just saying, look, if we don't talk about this now, it could be worse. And actually, if we talk about this now, you'll have more control. Like a lot of people are afraid of losing control, right? Especially older men, right?
Yeah.
I've been doing this my whole life. I'm great. I got it. Don't tell me what to do. But one way to approach that issue is to just say, hey, look, if we don't take care of this now, something bad happens. Who's going to get involved? The lawyers are going to get involved,
Right.
and probate court's going to get involved. So let's take care of this now.
So for say children with aging parents or other relatives that are keeping tabs on them, what are some leading indicators that the individuals are starting to make harmful financial decisions?
Well, unfortunately, again, one of the first skills to decline is financial decision making. I was actually involved in a clinical study conducted right down the street here at Mass General, where we tried to look at I did it with the head of geriatric psychiatry. We tried to better understand the relationship between cognitive impairment, financial decision making, and aging. And what we found was it really seemed like executive function, what psychiatrists and neurologists call executive function. That's most important for financial decision making. So what's executive function? So that's the ability to plan, the ability to organize, ability to connect the dots. It's funny because I lived in Belmont for many years, and you literally can't walk down. You're right next to McLean Hospital. You can't walk down the street without bumping into a psychiatrist. And so I would sometimes, talk to psychiatrists. Hey, we did this study, and we found that executive function is really important for financial decision making. They look at me and say, "You think?" So that's one thing, but sometimes that's a little harder to notice. I mean, I've noticed just with my mother and my former mother-in-law, there's getting lost. I remember my mother used to live out in Springfield, and she would come to visit us, and she'd been to our place a bunch of times. And one time she was coming out, and I got a phone call. She said, "I'm lost." It's like, okay, you're not driving out here anymore. And I even asked, remember I asked the head of psychiatry at Mass General Hospital, Jerry Rosenbaum at the time, who said, is it a worse thing if what's it worse if your client, if your patient, I forgot how to put it, but I said, is it worse if they don't show up or if they get lost driving and he said, if they get lost, that's a problem. So there's issues around sort of confusion, around difficulty to make decisions. Language is another one too. So if you see there's a fair amount of evidence that suggests that people's vocabulary kind of shrinks. And so if they're not as articulate as they used to be, all right, so this was my ex-mother-in-law, she would just start speaking. It was so sad. She would start speaking and then she would just stop. The words just didn't come. So that's another thing, but just organizing, impulsivity is another big one. If someone was previously, pretty in control of their emotions or their actions, and they start, all of a sudden, hey, I just, bought a new boat, and they never talked about buying a boat before. You might say, yeah, that's, and then, so those are some of the signs. And the bottom line, if you're worried about someone, get them tested. We took my mother to Mass General Hospital, went through the battery of tests. She saw a neurologist. Turns out she did have frontal lobe dementia. And she had, early signs of Alzheimer's. So those are some of the things, and we can talk about sort of mitigate some steps you can take to mitigate those. But
yeah, let's go there. So you talked about taking them for testing. What are some other things you can
yeah,
do to
so
help out?
doctors, especially if you live in this area, your best hospitals in the world, that's their job. Neurologists and psychiatrists, and get tested. There's those simple cognitive tests. That can be done. There's a lot of testing, but I would say both see a psychiatrist and a neurologist, because a neurologist can do the imaging of the brain, and the psychiatrist can do more things like recognize your vocabulary and things like that. The other thing that I frequently recommend, and it's a little bit of a cousin of what Abby was talking about, having a money buddy. I always talk about putting together a financial wellness team, because it's really important to have a team that can protect you, that can help you make the decisions, that you can delegate responsibilities to. We did that fortunately with my family. One of my sisters lived close to my mom, so she was taking care of the bills and going to the house and doing cleanup. I had another sister who just liked finances. She was doing the investment stuff. I was taking my mom to all her doctor's appointments. So we had sort of a delegated process. But it's really, really hard to do it on your own. I mean, it's impossible for an older adult to do it. Just, they can't do it.
Yeah.
They can't do it by themselves. And if you let them, it just becomes unsafe. The other thing I learned from, the doctors at Mass General Hospital is you really focus on safety. It's the first question he would always ask, is your mom safe? Is she physically safe? And there's a sort of a cognitive component to that as well. So you want to make sure that they're safe. You want to make sure that they've got, good healthcare, good healthcare providers. They're seeing them, but you have this team surrounding them to protect them. At some point we just said, Mom, power of attorney. My sisters were both power of attorney. My mom wasn't making any financial decisions at all. So power of attorney, healthcare proxy, those types of documents are, living will, DNR, get all those documents in place. And you always want to do this before you think you need to. I mean, now there's multiple studies. Was one FINRA? I know one was FINRA's probably done so. I know like the Federal Reserve has done studies on this, and they all show 4, 6, maybe even 8 years before an official diagnosis of dementia, people start making mistakes. So you really got to start this early.
Those big quick dips in financial knowledge is one.
Well, yeah. The other thing happens, and that's a great point. And I saw this with my mom. The decline is very discontinuous. You know, it's like mom's doing fine. Whoa, mom seems really different this week. And sometimes she would come back a little, but sometimes she just dropped, and then they plateau off. So it's a step function in math. It's not like this. You just like this, boom. And so it drops off. So you want to make sure that you're starting that process as soon as possible. And again, if you have reluctance, it's usually more the dad probably who's going to be reluctant, but just say, Dad, I'm doing this to help you. I'm worried about our safety. I'm not trying to take control away from you. Or even I'm trying to make sure that mom's going to be okay. So there's those steps you can take, but get started early. You know, don't really assume anything, because, you know, the data suggests, the data I look at suggests that about 14% of adults over 65 have Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, and then about another 15% have mild cognitive impairment. So that's 30%. 30% of adults over 65 should not be making financial decisions on their own. And of course, that number goes up, right? It's 30% is kind of the midpoint, but when you get up to early 80s, you're talking about, you know, 50% chance that you know your parent or grandparent is really struggling with financial decisions. So it's something that you need to jump on again.
The other thing, and I liked how you were talking about how in your mom's situation where she had that support network, right?
Yeah.
So we know, and through research that we've done, loneliness is tied to poor financial decision making, poor
Absolutely.
decision making, period, especially in those that are in lower cognition. So not cognitively declined, but lower cognition.
Yeah, I mean, the former Surgeon General calls loneliness the #1 disease in America.
Absolutely.
So that's another major risk factor. Social isolation, loneliness, huge risk factor, maybe as big as any of the other ones. So that's another thing to notice. You know, make sure the person you're looking after is not just sitting at home, and make sure they're not answering phone calls from people that they don't know, those kinds of things. So maybe we'll probably talk more about that later. But yeah, it's at some level, you know, human beings, we evolved in tribes. We're not meant to be sitting alone, right? You know, if you know, thousands of years ago, if you were an old person sitting alone, you were dead. You were not going to make it. So it's really kind of this unnatural state of affairs to have an older adult just being there all alone. That's a very, very precarious situation.
Okay. Well, thanks, Chris. That's actually a good segue when we're talking about scary phone calls to seniors to Rob, and he's going to discuss research that FINRA has done surrounding scams targeting seniors, which is something that I think a lot of us have heard a lot about. So, Rob?
All right. So first, I'm going to say I brought some handouts if anybody's interested. So I don't go into too much detail. This one here talks about some of our older adult specific research that we've done around decision making. So it highlights some of the points that you've mentioned. It also talks about some of those vulnerabilities. We know that financial insecurity is one of those indicators that leads to the more likeliness to engage in a scam situation. Financial insecurity, as most of you know, is that inability to come up with, say, that $2,000 emergency need. We know the method in which scammers target us is a factor that drives engagement. So those that are targeted through online means are more likely to engage and therefore be victimized. And then isolation is one of those components. So this one here, it talks about, it's just the high level. And for those that are interested in more of the research that we have, our FINRA Foundation website, finrafoundation.org, has our whole research library where you can go through and look at all the different research that we've worked on. So I have this here if anybody is interested in grabbing that.
Okay. So Rob, what are some of the examples of the types of scams that you're seeing on the rise that are targeting seniors?
So I like how the very beginning of today's session talked about, there was a reference to scams, right? Getting those phone calls. And a lot of us that have in our minds that it's older adults that are predominantly the ones being victimized. We've seen a little bit of a shift And we know that anybody can be a victim, anybody can be targeted. Younger individuals are actually reporting at a higher rate than older individuals. Older individuals are losing more money. They have more money to lose. They are still a prime target. So some of the top scams that we're hearing and seeing about, they're all variations of impersonations. Regardless of the age, it's impersonations. As you get older, the impersonation might shift. So it might be an emergency type situation where the older adult gets a call from somebody that sounds exactly like their grandchild. And they say, you know what, I'm locked in a prison in Mexico. I need your help. Can you wire me some money? Or it'll be an emergency room that's calling and say there's been a terrible accident. You are listed as the point of contact for so-and-so, the grandchild. We can't get the insurance card to work. Can you send some money so we can at least start that life-saving treatment, right? And that, as an older adult, we know that emotions are big factors that make us make decisions, right? So when you're an older individual and you have that heightened sense of emotion, that heightened state of emotion, you are more likely to make decisions that you wouldn't make under a flatline state. And we've done research around this. We've looked at older adults and younger individuals, and through gaming techniques, gotten them into heightened states of emotion, positive or negative. And we saw that older individuals, when in that heightened state of emotion, whether it's the positive or negative, they are more likely to engage in misleading advertisements and potentially scam situations. Yeah, exactly. So emotions are a big component that fraudsters leverage. So when you get that call from the grandchild that's been in the accident, that's an emotional play. That's getting that senior, that older individual to say, oh my gosh, I've got to do something. The rational thinking goes out the window. They start to act in the moment. So it's all various forms of impersonations. Some of the other ones that we're seeing on the rise, and these are often aided by artificial intelligence. So the emergency scam, it sounds like a family member because of voice cloning, because they have taken clips from social media. They've created this profile. They've created what sounds exactly like that grandchild, which adds to the potential thought of legitimacy. So when that older individual gets that call and it sounds like their grandchild, they think they have to act. So AI has definitely played a role in enhancing these scams. Some of the other ones that we're seeing, relationship investment scams are really big. This also kind of transcends multiple ages. Has anybody heard the term pig butchering?
Yep.
Okay. Terrible, terrible name. Essentially, it's a relationship investment scam. The way they work, and the reason the name is pig butchering, is because you are raising a target, fattening up the target before you slaughter it. The way these work are not necessarily romantic situations, but ones that start out as a friendship, a companionship, some kind of a connection. They build up that relationship. It can be romantic. It might not be romantic. Then there's ultimately that ask for money. So under like a traditional romance scam, there's, let's meet up. Can you send me some money so I can fly in? Or I'm having trouble with my visa, whatever it may be. Relationship investment scams move to crypto. And they start talking about, you know what, I've had a lot of success trading cryptocurrency. I'm happy to teach you. I won't even be involved in your finance or your decisions. Let me just walk you through the steps that I do to make some significant money. And the person still feels like they're in control. They log into the website. It looks like a real website. They maybe put in a little bit of money just to test the waters. They see the price go up and they get excited. So this is great. This might be real. But I remember somebody told me that a lot of times you can't get your money out. So I'm going to try to withdraw my initial investment, that $1,000 initial investment, and you can get it out. So you're like, wow, this is real. So you put more in. And as you keep escalating and you keep adding more, the switch ends on the other side. You realize that this is just a fictitious platform designed to steal your money and designed to look and feel real. So that's pig butchering. That's relationship investment scams, which is a much kinder name. Confidence scams is another term that it goes by. Investment clubs is the last one that I'm going to talk about. And those, if anybody spends time on social media, you've probably seen posts that look like it's from Jim Cramer or Kathy Wood or some other financial celebrity, if you will, encouraging you to join them on their WhatsApp platform. And you join that WhatsApp platform and they tell you what to trade, how to trade, when to buy, when to sell. This is 2 days pump and dump. So instead of pounding the phones like we used to have in the 80s and 90s, pushing those low price securities, it's now being done through social media. And they are getting people excited through social media, directing them to an encrypted chat platform. So whether it's Telegram, whether it's WhatsApp, whatever the other ones are that are out there, allowing you to do the investing on your own. So again, you have that sense of control. And these are simply pushing low-priced, foreign-issued securities, and they're today's pump and dumps.
So how can people fight back against this?
It's a good question. It's not as easy as we think, right? So in my opinion, education is a key component. It is not the answer. It's not the only answer. I wish it was. I'm in the education world. I talk to people about frauds and scams. I research frauds and scams. I wish education was the only answer. It needs to come in surround sound. So we need to talk to people. One, we need to get people to know what the scams are, what they look like, how they operate. I spent all that time talking about those 3 scams because for those of you that have not heard of them, you need to know about them. Through research that we've done, we know that the more we know about scams, how they operate, the better protected we are. So education is a key component, education for you all in this room, and then it kind of cascades after you leave this room. So you talk to your family, you talk to your friends, you talk to your clients, you talk to your children, you talk to your parents. The more you can educate them on what is happening, the better protected they're going to be. So education is a component. We also need controls and policy in place, right? So we need to have better protections for individuals. And FINRA, I mentioned that we're a regulator. We've put 2 rules into place that kind of aims at tackling this. So for those of you that aren't on the brokerage side, you might not be aware, or you might. So 2165 is our rule that provides a safe harbor for brokerage firms to put a temporary hold on the disbursements of funds or securities if they believe that fraud is occurring or will be occurring. So it provides that firm that safe harbor to stop the flow of money. We know once the money's gone, it is really hard, if not impossible, to get it back. So it gives that safe harbor to investigate further, to reach out to law enforcement, to reach out to adult protective services if it's an older adult, to get the right people in the mix to attack the situation. And then the other one we put out was a rule that requires brokerage firms to obtain a trusted contact on retail accounts. And a trusted contact is essentially an emergency contact. It is somebody that is authorized, that the firm is authorized to contact if they are concerned about what's happening in an account, if they're concerned about the cognition of a client. If they can't reach a client, they can contact that trusted contact. It is not a power of attorney. It is not somebody who has trading authority. It is not somebody who gets intimate account details. It is an emergency contact in case something happens. So those are 2 ways that we've kind of stepped in to try to take a stance on all this.
Okay. So I know FINRA's done a lot of good work around the emotional component of scams, specifically if someone you care about gets caught in a scam and the shame that can come with it. Can you talk about that and how you should interact with that person and help them?
Absolutely. So again, I got more stuff up here for you all. This one here is our fraud journey map. So through the FINRA Foundation, we work with a variety of different partners to learn and educate individuals and the population as a whole. One of those partners is a nonprofit in the mental health space called Give an Hour. Their kind of mantra is you have mental health professionals that give an hour of their time to help individuals, so they give back. We partnered with them to really dig into the emotional impact of financial fraud. When we talk about financial fraud, we often go to the numbers. So the Federal Trade Commission released their data set recently. $15.9 billion was lost in 2025 due to frauds and scams. We go to the numbers. We often gloss over and ignore the emotional impact. So this journey map kind of talks a little bit about what that journey is going to look like for a fraud victim or a fraud survivor. One of the things that we need to really be careful about, which leads me to my next one, right? This is our It's Not the Victim's Fault guide, is the language that we use when we talk to an individual who has been victimized. A lot of times we'll use words like, oh, well, they fell for the scam. Or, they tell you about a situation and you just start thinking, oh my God, I can't believe you fell for it. I can't believe you gave a stranger your money, right? And these are natural reactions for us, but they are detrimental to that individual that's been targeted and victimized. Because it takes them, they internalize that shame and blame. They feel like it's their fault, and it's not their fault. Scammers are really good at manipulating individuals. It is the scammer, it is the perpetrator, it is the criminal's fault. It is not the victim's fault. So this one talks a little bit about how we can change our language. I think it's really important that we as a society and us in the financial world, we pick our words carefully to make sure that we're not causing additional impact, additional damage to an individual that's suffered a traumatic experience, which frauds and scams are. I'm going to stop with two support groups for you all. If you encounter somebody who has been a victimized, so I mentioned Give an Hour, they operate a peer support program. It's a drop-in program for victims of financial fraud. It is free. Anybody can use it. It is led by a licensed mental health professional. It is peer-led, so other individuals that have gone through that same emotional impact are together on that call. They're virtual. The other one is fightcybercrime.org, and that is an organization we've partnered with to create a peer support program for romance scam and crypto victims and survivors. So if an individual has been victimized by a romance scam or a crypto scam, they go through a 10-week cohort where they tackle all things from going back out and living a digital life, how to do reverse Google image searches, how to address the emotional impacts, the safety planning components. What am I going to do when it's tax time? Because now I've pulled money out of a qualified account. So they go through that 10-week period. They work with these individuals to help them recover emotionally from what has happened. Another one that's completely free. So those are two really great resources for you all. My last flyer I have here talks about our fraud fighting work on our website, if anybody's interested in grabbing one of those.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Rob.
Sure.
That leaves us with about a little less than 10 minutes for questions. Does anybody have a question? Alice, do we have a microphone? I bet we can hear you. Oh, yeah. Wait for Mike. Sorry.
Thank you. We have a lot of professionals in the room who work at asset management firms, not brokerage firms. Does Rule 2165 apply to them as well?
So that's going to primarily, if I'm not mistaken, it's going to be for more retail clients. So, and if you're on the asset management side, if you're on the investment advisory side, our rules would not apply unless it's a brokerage client. Yeah, but I will say on the investment advisory side, some firms that straddle both might still put a hold in place. And a lot of firms, not all firms, but firms take the approach of, I'm going to get sued either way. Would I rather get sued for stopping the money from going out or for letting the money go out? Right. So, and I say that blanketly with my FINRA hat off, right? Because I am not endorsing that kind of behavior, but it's a risk decision that firms have to make. And some firms do take the approach of, you know what, if I have a suspicion, I'm going to stop the flow of funds and deal with what the repercussions are going to be. And that's at a firm by firm basis.
Thank you. Dan has a question.
Thanks, everybody. Great conversation. One practical tip, or would be curious what you think about it, is when you were talking about the New York Fed, the research was on credit scores, and the fact that they were able to extrapolate when the scores were going down, that was a correlation to cognitive decline. Chris is nodding. So I was wondering if anyone's seen this or heard if you can get a older relative to let you look up their credit score, just because that might be another early warning sign. So I just wondered what people thought.
I don't see why you couldn't. I don't know about the legal ramifications, but if the adult gave a sibling that information, it seems that would be fine. The other thing, doing a credit freeze. I mean, I did a credit freeze. Just do a credit freeze. Just everybody in the room, just do it. It takes 5 minutes. The only thing is I get an email from Experian every day. That's the only downside. But it's a good question, Suzanne. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to get in trouble, but it seems like it should be doable.
Yeah. Another suggestion is you can get your name added to a bank account, obviously, if the loved one agrees to it, and then you can monitor, what's going in and out of the account. There's
also technology solutions. I obviously can't endorse any of them, but they Not because I don't want to, just I'm not able to endorse. But there are technology solutions that allow, again, kind of like a trusted individual to have not access, but notifications if something
Right.
unusual happens within an account. So if it's a brokerage account, a bank account, a credit card, there's an unusual kind of withdrawal or transaction, it'll send a notification to the trusted
Right.
network. So there are different technology solutions and companies that are coming out to try to get more people in the loop in a
Yeah,
safe and manageable way.
EverSafe. You probably can't say EverSafe, but I know those. I know
That
those
is one of
folks.
them, yes.
Yeah, I know those folks. Yeah, so you can do it, and you can just, and that's another really good protective measure is to just have these monitoring. Just do basic fraud monitoring. There's a bunch of different ways to do that, but just if Dad every week now he's taking $10,000 out of his bank account, that's probably not a good thing. There's probably something's up with that. So that's another a really good step that you can take as a family member to help, especially to protect your parents or other family
Yeah,
members.
shut down his DraftKings account.
Yeah, gambling.
But also making sure that the software is updated, right? On computers and things like that. I mean,
Absolutely.
we often don't think about it, but that's an infiltration point.
It
If
is.
you
Yep.
don't have the latest software or you don't have a good antivirus type of programming on your parents or anybody's computer, that's a vulnerability
Yeah,
point.
that's what those patches are for.
Yeah.
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 Any other questions? No? Well, round of applause, please, for our three panelists. Okay.
Thank you. Is that on? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our inaugural Financial Literacy Leadership Summit. That is a mouthful, Andrew said earlier. I'm Jeannie Wolf. I'm the CEO of CFA Society Boston. I have had the distinct privilege and pleasure of being in my role for 16 years, but being part of the start of this amazing program that we're doing and growing and reaching so many communities. I could sit and talk to you all day as my parents are 80. And the good thing is they're very cheap. So I don't think they'd bail out any of their grandkids, actually. But thank you all for taking the time to come, the speakers, the volunteers, the community partners, to our OG, Alice and Mike and Will Krause, who is not here, and Pam Yang, who is also, I think she came, and everyone else who's been a part of this. It does take a village, especially for this, and we appreciate all of you being a part of that. To our friends at CFA societies around the globe who are participating virtually, thank you. We're very excited about getting this movement out much further than it already is. So thank you again. Round of applause for everybody.